right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to this session on COVID-19 mapping. This session will run from 10:30 to noon, and we have three different time blocks in this session. First, from 10:30 to 11:15 a.m., we're going to have Daniel Myers, who's a GIS analyst in the Office of Emergency Management from the city of Boston, talk about the Metro Boston Homeland Security Region COVID-19 operations dashboard. There'll then be a 5-minute for maybe a question or two in a transition over to the next presentation, which will be from 11:20 to 11:40. And they'll be given by Katie Grillo, who's a GIS web technology specialist for the city of Cambridge, Mass. And she'll be talking about COVID-19 public comment for shared streets initiative. Immediately following Katie's presentation from 11:40 to noon, we're going to have a block of further discussion. So both questions for Katie or Daniel. And for those 20 minutes, it'll be just open conversation. One of the things that we suggest, if you're willing and able, that during that period of time, you could turn on your video so that people can see, give you a little bit better sense of who's there and talking. But of course, if you don't want to do that, that's okay as well. And one reminder, which we've been doing in all these sessions, is that the Zoom chat is disabled. So we need any questions that you have or chat you can put into the Whova chat. But one thing to be sure is that when you go to the agenda, you can see the session, and then you can go into each of the individual sub-sessions or each of the talks. So we prefer that you do the chat in the session itself so that we don't get lost within the individual talks. And one of the benefits, of course, of the Whova chat is that it will continue to exist after the session has ended, so conversations can continue there. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Daniel to start his presentation.
All right, thank you, Shane. Just give me 1 second to start sharing my screen. Which one are we? I think it's this one. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, thank you everyone for choosing to spend the next hour and a half or so with me, Katie, and Shane. I just want to start by acknowledging all of the workers, the essential workers, the healthcare workers, everyone that's been involved in COVID-19 for the past several months. I think that's just important to do since we are talking about COVID-19 GIS for the next hour and a half. Like Shane said, I am the GIS analyst for the Boston Office of Emergency Management. And our office does a number of things, including planning and preparedness for natural and man-made disasters. We do public information sharing and things like that. We activate for any major event in the city. So from a parade to the Boston Marathon to a pandemic, we are activated in our emergency operations center or right now from home. And I'm the GIS analyst for the office. I'm the only GIS analyst. And it is my job to create applications, dashboards, maps, perform GIS analysis for any of the work that we're kind of doing in the office. And so for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about a few of the different applications that we created for the COVID-19 pandemic. And I hope that you guys learn something from this or, take something away from it. So just to get started, just to give you some kind of spatial context, I work for the Boston Office of Emergency Management, but we don't just serve the city of Boston. We're actually part of a larger group called the Metro Boston Homeland Security Region. So it includes Boston and its 8 surrounding cities and towns, including Cambridge, where Katie's from. So I do know Katie from that. But there's about 1.2 million people in the whole area. And for COVID-19, at any given time, now and in the past, there's been about 3 to 4 of the state's hotspots within the Metro Boston Homeland Security Region. So it was really important for us to create some applications that allowed us to have situational awareness throughout the whole region, not just for the city of Boston, because anytime there is COVID-19, it's not going to stay within a city or a town's borders, it's going to spread. People might be going to the same grocery store and things like that, even if they don't even live in the same town. So it was important for us to create an application that allowed us to have eyes on the whole region and track some of this data that was being put out. So just for some spatial context, and next I included this timeline because I think it's really important to think about when and why we made certain decisions. So we all know February 1st confirmed case of COVID-19 in Boston. And we were already seeing some really cool GIS applications out there. I know yesterday they spoke about the Johns Hopkins dashboard in the morning at one of the tracks. And that was one of the things that we were seeing a lot on the news and a lot of people using. So that was one of the first things that I made sure people had access to. And people were starting to ask, what can we do in our office and at the city of Boston to create our own application that would be useful? So we started to think about, what is the gap between what is already available and what would be useful for our office and the other cities and towns in the region. So one of the first things we did, this is our Boston Maps online ArcGIS organization. And at the time, actually, there was a fake Johns Hopkins coronavirus dashboard going around. I don't know if anyone heard about that, but it was being used to kind of phish information and scam people. So this is one of the first things that I did is I went to our online organization and I made sure that this was embedded right on the homepage so that people could access it in an area that they're familiar with and that they know they're going to be accessing the real dashboard, because people wanted to know, how cases were progressing and where at the time. And the second thing we did was started to set up different groups on ArcGIS Online so that we could share information and applications that we were collecting. So this dashboard was put in the group. A number of other critical infrastructure layers like hospitals and schools were also put in the group to facilitate data sharing. So back in February, that's what we started. And then in March, as the governor started to declare a state of emergency, our Emergency Operations Center moved to a level 1 activation, which is the highest level. That just means that we're in the Emergency Operations Center pretty much all week, and we are focusing our efforts on whatever the activation is for. And that was really when we started to create our own applications and figuring out that gap between what was available and what we needed to fill in for our own uses. That's when we started to create some of our own applications for the office and for the region. And the next thing that I really want to highlight is that back in April, our Emergency Operations Center moved to virtual operations. And I want to highlight this because it really changed how we interacted with and how we thought about online GIS applications and especially operations dashboards. If you're not in emergency management, this is what an Emergency Operations Center looks like. Just to give you a little bit of context, this is not Boston's Emergency Operations Center. I did not have a good picture of Boston's Emergency Operations Center. This is the CDC's, the Center for Disease Control's Emergency Operations Center. But essentially, when you boil it down, it's a room, lots of people, different departments, different representatives, and there's a lot of computers, and there's a lot of screens. And so when we moved to our virtual operation, we really had to change the way we thought about people interacting with the different applications that we put out. In the Operations Center, we have many different dashboards. We have dashboards for traffic. We have dashboards for weather. And there's screens all along the walls that we are able to put these up with. But now we were all working from home using our online tools like our ArcGIS Online organization and our WebEOC platform, if you guys are familiar with that. But one of the things we lost was all of these screens that are relaying this information. So we had to think, what really is an operations dashboard? Is it something like this cool Planet Earth control deck from Star Trek? Just kind of feeding us telemetry and real-time data that we can see on a screen and ingest real time to help us make decisions? Or is it an application that we can really interact with and use to kind of peel back the layers and create a different dashboard from the dashboard that you already have, really? You're filtering out different information by the user using it rather than me, the GIS analyst, creating several different dashboards for whatever purpose that we need. So I thought that this was a real shift in moving from the operations center to moving to our homes and maybe only having one tiny laptop screen. Maybe if you're lucky, you have two that you can put different dashboards or things up if you need to, but really changed how I thought about how people would use the dashboard when we were creating them. So just something to think about as we kind of go through the different applications. So in total, we had three main applications that we created for the COVID-19 response, two of them being dashboards, one being a web app builder application, but these are the three main applications, but there's actually a bunch of different applications that are flowing into these and working. So There are three mains, but there's really several others that are helping to kind of build these up and feed data into each of these dashboards, really. So the first one being resource request tracking. Our office, along with the Boston Public Health Commission, were tracking different resource requests for things like personal protective equipment that were coming into the office. So the first step was actually to use a Survey 123 form. And this Survey 123 form was embedded on our web EOC. I'll talk about that, how that works a little bit more later. But the cool things about it was that it was tracking our top requested items. So at any time during the day, we could see the top 10 requested items and kind of use that as a gauge to figure out what's being requested and what's going to be needed. And it's also categorizing and displaying these requests based on our different categorizations of those. So it was just helpful to visualize that. Second, being our resource request ticket editor. I kind of thought of it like a ticketing system. People put requests in through Survey 123, and then we need a way to track and let people know that we are either working on their request and what status it has. So users were able to edit the delivery status of these requests. And the big thing about this was it was friendly to non-GIS users. So like I said, I'm pretty much the only GIS person in my office. There are other GIS people in the city and in other cities. But a lot of the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis do not have any familiarity with GIS tools. So we were able to create a web app application that was easy for users to interact with and kind of learn how to use without really having any kind of GIS knowledge. And then secondly, we had aerial imagery on there. So if there was a note on the request saying, deliver in the back of the building or something, we were able to use our up-to-date imagery. We have a subscription to NEARC, which gives us straight down and oblique imagery 3 times a year. We were able to use that to kind of figure out, get some eyes on the ground before we even out there to figure out where that shipment was going to go. So I thought that was a really great benefit of that tool. And also, this was all feeding into the dashboard that I just talked about. So in real time, as people were editing these resource requests, we were able to track them and figure out what was going on through the day. And then finally, we have the COVID-19 cases dashboard. So essentially, this was how we tracked the daily case numbers in each of the 9 MBHSR cities. And at the time, there was only that county level data layer available. I'm pretty sure that's only still available, but the way that we kind of tracked and created a city level layer was actually just by checking their websites every day. That was really the only place to find out information on city level specific COVID-19 data. So this ranged from social media sites. Sometimes mayors were just posting on their Facebook. Other cities or towns created whole websites dedicated to COVID-19, and others created their own dashboards. And so we needed a place to consolidate this information because, like I said, something that happens in Revere is obviously going to affect Chelsea, especially in a pandemic. So just for that example. And then we were also able to consume and display some other layers using that, like the Johns Hopkins University layer and some other layers from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. And then we also embedded other planning tools because, like I said, people now weren't just kind of viewing this on their screen and watching data update in real time. They're on their laptops, they're in their home, and they're able to interact with this data. So I made sure to include some planning tools like the Social Vulnerability Index and some other demographic information that might help the planning team or some other departments in another city or town really use that as a planning tool and not just a situational awareness, what are the case numbers kind of tool feeding me that telemetry data. So here's just a very simple workflow. I've seen some really crazy diagrams the past few days. I'm keeping it simple. So basically it starts with Survey 123, goes into Web App Builder and into an operations dashboard, essentially. So the first step of that process is Survey 123. I made this video just to show, sorry, give me a second to get that set up. I'm gonna put up my quality, maybe P, and then we're gonna go full screen. So I did make this video. I hope everyone can follow along okay. But basically the first thing that you see on this Survey 123 form is like a welcome page. These are the steps and what you have to do. And also what we're taking requests for and some other links that might be beneficial to people. So, oh, whoops, I pressed the space bar. I should have pressed the video. But there we go, we're back. The first page really just kind of an introduction to what the form does. And then I'm going to actually walk through this with you by putting in a test request that I'm going to show you later. So, I'm Daniel Myers, I'm the GIS analyst. A lot of this is just fake test data, so just keep that in mind. There is about 20 people in our office though. This page, first page, is really important because this is really just descriptive information. And the reason why we used a Survey 123 form for this is because one of the really cool features of a Survey 123 form is one, like you can just see, I can set anything to be required that needs to be required. So all of this information is required for the form, but it also is going to cache the data that you input. So I don't know if you noticed, but on the first page, you had to submit a different form for every item that you were requesting. But all of this information is going to be saved on this first page so that you don't have to keep inputting it again. The only thing you have to re-input is the other item that you need to request. So here's my contact information. That is my real phone number, but only call me for an emergency. And then second page now, what is the item that you're requesting? We had a drop-down box with all the different items that we had available. What is the priority, objective of why you need that item? Really things like that. And all this is going to be input into the form that we're then going to see on our web app builder in the next couple slides. I got a little tripped up here, so I'm going to skip ahead as I made the video. So then this next page, also really important. If you choose no, it's going to end your submission. Anything that's not a mask type, a glove, a gown, a swab, or a testing material is a non-medical request, so like hand sanitizer, for example. So you would pick no if you picked something like hand sanitizer, and that would end your submission and you would see the end. For the purpose of this, I said this was a medical resource request. I did pick an N95 mask. And then there's just some additional questions that were required by state and federal guidelines that we had to ask if it was a medical request. Let's just kind of skip through here. And we didn't come up with these questions ourselves at the office either. This was created in collaboration with the Boston Public Health Commission. And like I just said, we followed state and federal guidelines on what we should be asking people when they do put in a resource request. And then finally, we get to this last page. Great, your resource request was sent successfully. Check the status at the dashboard, which I'm going to show you later, or some contact information in case people had a question. But the next step in this process is actually, we're going to go to our Geo Event Manager. This is just a generic screenshot of a Geo Event Manager. This isn't the actual setup that we did because that was way more complicated. But once someone submitted a resource request, it's going to actually send you send out two emails. One to the user who submitted it so that they can review all of the information that they put in, and then another to the office so that we would know that we have another resource request that we need to go check out. This was a really important part to kind of complete that circle really of customer interaction. If we want to think of them like customers, we want them to know that we are acknowledging that they sent in a resource request, and we also want to keep them updated on what's going on. So this is a really important part in the workflow too. So next, in our very simple workflow, we're going to Web App Builder. So this is the Web App Builder application that we created. Very simple, used very few widgets or tools that they included. The first and most important being the Smart Editor tool here. This is what we use to actually edit those tickets or resource requests. So users had to click on a point and then they were able to edit a couple of the fields. And I'll show that more of that in a second. But to actually find the point, you could either put in an address or put in the name of the organization. We configured it to kind of look in the actual resource request feature service, or you could use some of these filters that we set up. So by default, it's only going to look at the non-completed ones. And as you can see here, we have 5 different status updates for these, either awaiting review, in progress. We were able to partially complete it, but not fully, and or if we had to elevate it to the state. So that was the 4 used by default. You could click any of those if you were looking for a specific one, or you could use the address tool to find that. And just to point out, this is our imagery that we do purchase through a subscription that we included on this application. And I thought this was a really great benefit to this because, like I said before, here's a point in downtown Boston, and this is test data, by the way. This isn't unfulfilled requests right now. I just wanted to give a good picture. This is a building in downtown Boston. Where am I going to drop that off? Where is it going to go to? And the imagery really allowed us to kind of get a better view and anticipate what we would find when we got there before we even left the building. So I thought that was a really great benefit. So here we are. Here's this point that I just put in at our Emergency Operations Center. You can see my name here, my office, my number, and if you scroll down on this box, you could see all of the other information that I included on there. But as you can see, all of these are grayed out because we don't want people to edit the information that people put in. We just wanted to add a couple more fields so that people could add either some notes, say they were able to partially complete it and they were only able to fulfill 20% of the order. That's a note that they could put in there. And then also tracking who has been assigned to complete this request at the office. So just for us to be able to kind of track on who's doing what, in case we get a question down the line, who delivered this to this organization, we can go back and say, oh, it was Daniel, and we could ask him something, for example. And this really important part is the status, actually. It's a drop down, like I said, but anytime that this status drop down was edited, the geo event server was listening to see if that was edited to generate another email to the user or to the submitter, sorry, so that they could know that the status of their resource request had been updated. Just to keep them apprised of what's going on, and they don't have to figure out how to find this dashboard or whatever, or call the office to figure out when their request is going to be fulfilled. It's going to be right in their email as soon as we edit it. So I thought that was a really great benefit and added feature. This isn't the only way to do it either, I want to say. We have a geo event manager at the city, so we chose to use this. But there are other actual third-party applications that can do this service as well. One of them is Integromat. Another is, I think they call it Power Automate now by Microsoft. It used to be Microsoft Flow. I really like that one personally. But there are other applications that can do this if you don't have a geo event manager, or this is just like too complicated. It's really easy to use those third-party applications as well. Just gotta point that out. All right, so finally, the fun part are our operations dashboards. Which is the final part. I'm going to talk about two different operations dashboards. One, the resource request tracking one, and our COVID-19 case tracking dashboard. We're going to start with this resource request tracking. As you can see in the middle, we have that web app builder I talked about embedded right in there. So users that are editing these requests can just go to one place. They can see all the information they need. And you can actually full size this too. So just in case you don't want to look at these different indicators, you just want to edit some points, you can full size this. But on the left, this is normally a list. I did block it out because I didn't want to share any of that information out. But normally a list, people can go through the list and see what different resource requests are coming in. To the bottom of that is a gauge. Again, just test data. We don't have 32 incomplete requests right now. But as you log in the morning or whenever you're working, you can actually see how many incomplete requests there are currently. So just a real great gauge on what needs to be fulfilled and what work needs to be done for the day. Two, this is how we kind of categorize the data versus medical and non-medical. That was that yes or no drop down in the survey 1, 2, 3 form. And you can see most of our resource requests were medical. We got a lot of them. But just kind of giving us an idea of, what supply do we need and what are we going to fulfill, especially with probably the coolest part is these are the top 10 requested items. So at the time, disinfectant wipes were one of the most top requested items. And as you hover over that, you can see actual numbers as well too, but this is just a screenshot. But this was really important for us so that we could see, what are people in most need of that are requesting these items and kind of allow us to gauge, what supplies do we have, what might we need more of, things like that. I thought that was a really great added value to this dashboard as well. And so this is a COVID-19 dashboard. This is not the full dashboard, but this is actually a separate dashboard, a third one that we created to update these daily case numbers. And the reason why we did this was because, like I said before, a lot of the people that I work with that are doing this type of work, they are not GIS people. So we needed to come up with a way to easily consolidate all of this information and have a place where people can access all of those websites that we're tracking, and also update our polygons for each of the cities for the case numbers for that day. So this is what we came up with. On the left, this is embedded content. That's one of the things that you can input on a dashboard is embedded content. It can be a website, it can be something. This is a survey 123 form that we used URL parameters for. And if you're not familiar with that, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more because it's a really useful and easy to use tool that I use a lot of the time, not just for COVID-19, but allows us to kind of make selections out of this list and update the survey 123 form on the left. So for example, I want to update the numbers for Cambridge today. I'm going to go to their really great website first, check out the numbers, select it on my list, and now this survey 123 form is automatically going to populate to the correct city so that we can make sure we're inputting the right numbers. So this is how you do it. I didn't make these screenshots. These are right from the Esri blog post that I learned how to do this from, because I think this is a really useful tool to use. Up here, if we share out these slides, this is a link. But if you put this into Google, you're going to find the same blog post with all of these, and really easy to follow. So first, you select that feature. Whenever you make a survey 123 form, it's going to create a feature service on ArcGIS Online. So you want to make sure you select feature and the layer that's created from that feature service from your survey 123 form. Down here, this is just the link to your survey 123 form. So if you were going to share it out with someone, same link, you're going to input in here in your embedded content. In this example, they set the maximum features to 1. So you only see the form that you selected. I didn't do that just in case people wanted to kind of just scroll through and pick the right city or town, but multiple ways to do it. They did that, so you only see the one that's selected. Next, we're going to follow this GIF. So as you can see, this is that URL that I was just talking about, just a survey 123 link. And then they add this question mark mode equal edit. And then they're pointing to the global ID of the specific survey 123 form that they're looking for. And as you can see, it's in those brackets because it's inputting the global ID based on the city or town or whatever that you selected in your list. And it's only going to populate that on the left. So this was just a really easy way for us to do that. And then the last part of it is that you have to add a filter. So when you add the filter to your list, it's going to filter out, as you can see, this embedded content that you input. That's the survey 123 form. So we did that because it was a really easy way for us to make an application that was accessible to these non-GIS users and have people update these case numbers every day. And also just an easy way to keep all of these websites that we were checking out with really useful information that wasn't available in a GIS layer, and then create a GIS layer out of it. And they weren't even GIS users. So I thought that was a really great way to kind of do this work with the people that we had. So here is the actual dashboard. The numbers that we just input are being updated on the map here. The circles vary in size based on how many cases that you have. And you can see that on the legend. And then it's also updating this list on the right and then the line graph at the bottom. And so I broke this out a little bit more for you guys. So both of these are bar charts. The one on the top is a stacked bar chart. And this is consuming that Johns Hopkins University feature service layer. Like I said before, this was another cool layer that was made available on the Living Atlas on ArcGIS Online a little bit into the pandemic. But essentially it's showing you the number of beds that are available. And this is based on the map extent. So if you're not familiar with a dashboard, you can set each of these indicators to change based on the extent of your map. So right now it's showing the whole Metro Boston area, but if I just zoomed in to downtown Boston, for example, it's only going to show me how many beds are available in that area. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then next to that is a line graph, and this is the line graph just for Boston at the time. It's each of those days that we were inputting on the survey 1, 2, 3 form before. And you chose your different city by using this cool selector tool here. Each of these, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a second, but each of these cities and towns were put into the selector so that we could change both our view of the line graph and also of the map as well. This is just another way that you could see the data. If you selected any of the polygons, you were able to see this nice text version of how many cases there are, deaths, and recovered. Instead of just seeing a table, we edited that pop-up. But the selector also does something else where as you choose a city, I chose Somerville for this example, it's going to actually zoom into that city. It's going to change your graph and you're going to see all of these great critical infrastructure layers that we added to the map. As you can see here, it's everything that should be relevant to COVID-19, EMS stations, urgent care facilities, hospitals, colleges and universities, K-12 schools, nursing homes, EOCs, police stations. There was a few more than that, but you can see it right here on the map. There's lots of great information about that place, like the address, the phone number, some more included information depending on what the critical infrastructure was. And I just really want to point this out because I do work in emergency management. This comes from the Department of Homeland Security, but anyone can access this. All of this information is available on ArcGIS Online through the Highfield Open Data Hub. And this is all available to you on ArcGIS Online. A really great tool, has all this information. Because for me, I mainly work for the city of Boston, but I also work for all these other cities and towns. I don't necessarily have access to all of their GIS servers and all of their layers. So it would be a lot of legwork for me to try and grab all of their layers for schools, for example. But this just made it really easy. It's an entire catalog for the whole country. So this is one of the first things that we did was go here, identify what information was going to be useful for the COVID-19 pandemic back in February, and make that available in an ArcGIS Online group to people. So I just really want to point this out. I encourage a lot of people to go check this out. Even if you're not in emergency management or public safety, there's a lot of really useful information here that you can use with your ArcGIS Online subscription. And so finally, I'm almost to the end, but I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks. I did put this on Twitter a couple months ago just because I wanted to get some feedback. I wanted to share this with people in case they had any questions. And I got this question from the Tennessee State Data Center, which I thought was interesting. They asked me what the trick was for getting the dynamic text in the chart description. This right here, that current city Brookline that I was talking about, that you can see down here. This is actually a separate component of the operations dashboard. It's not dynamic text, it's actually a list that we filtered out for whatever city was selected. And I'm gonna walk you guys through my Twitter feed and exchange with the Tennessee State Data Center because, you know, if they found this useful, I'm sure one of you guys will too. So like I said, this is just another attached component of the operations dashboard. We stacked it below the line graph. So let's go back here. First, you have to start by adding a category selector on your header. So you first input a header, and then inside of the header, you can input a category selector. And then you choose what you want that category selector to look for. So I just input Boston and its 8 surrounding cities and towns in the Metro Boston Homeland Security region. And then you tell it what layers to look for. And it's not showing it here, but you can also tell it to look for the different tools or widgets that you input in your operations dashboard. So we set it to filter that list that we made, which each of the cities right here, to filter it to what is being selected on that dropdown. So rather than, you know, figuring out how to do dynamic text, or I think you can actually do something similar in Arcade, but I'm not sure. Rather than figuring that out, I just thought this was a nice exchange. I'm sure we can all relate. Sometimes the solution is not the solution. You got to find a workaround. You got to find something that works. And this is what worked for us. And obviously, you know, it tricks some people too into thinking that we were able to do that. But it was really just an embedded list that we were able to use for this. So I thought that was a really neat trick. And then next, I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the early iterations of the dashboard that we had started coming up with around February, March, and really how the situation evolved over time, which is why I think that timeline is important to kind of think back 6 or so months ago, what we were doing at the time, right? So as you can see here, At first, we were just trying to track assets in the field, which were mostly VMS boards at the time. If you're in the metro area, you might have seen one driving by. They say, please wear a mask. Go to this website for more information. So we're just trying to track where those were. And then also at the time, not every school had closed in the Metro Boston region. So we were trying to track which school had been closed at the time. And then it turned out every school was going to be closed, so that kind of solved that issue. But another really cool use of that Homeland Security data that I showed you guys is we were able just to clip that to the Homeland Security region, add a separate column for, open, closed, whatever. And then we were able to go in based on the city and just edit it as schools started to close. And this became a lot easier when all the schools closed, as you can imagine. But this is one of the early iterations. Second early iteration, it's very messy. There's a lot of information going on here, but it's really what we had at the time. I knew that this critical infrastructure was going to be really important. It's going to be very helpful for people in their planning processes, but it's just busy on the map. So we changed it to only show the coronavirus cases by city as default. And then as you zoom in, you can kind of see the specific information for your city or town. It's a lot cleaner look, easier to comprehend, and it's not like in your face as soon as you open up that dashboard. The other thing that we were trying to track is closed events. We did this in collaboration with the Massachusetts Emergency Management Office. But then everything pretty much closed, so we didn't have to do that anymore. And then the only layer we really had was this county level layer, which is why we decided to figure out a process that would be easy for us to track each of the 9 cities and towns and figure out what their cases are, rather than just for the county, because there are 4 different counties that actually are a part of the Metro Boston Homeland Security region. So it's not just one, it's 4 different counties, and not the whole county is included in the Metro Boston Homeland Security region. So it was hard for us to kind of really gauge what was going on there. So we really needed to track the different cities and towns. So that's why we ended up with the dashboard that we have. But these are just some of the early iterations. I think it's important to kind of think about and show these, just because the pandemic and our activation and our response to the pandemic really evolved over time. One day we're solving one problem, oh, we don't need to solve that problem anymore. We need to visualize something else. So that's really, I think, important to point out, which is why I included the timeline, is just kind of thinking about how our response shifted over time as well. And then finally, just some continuing work. This is one of the projects that we've been working on for the past few months, and I'm continuing to work on, is actually building out an ArcGIS hub page. If you've seen an open data site or another city's hub page, you're probably familiar with them. But we're really looking at this as kind of an internal organizing page. There was a lot of information on those dashboards, right? Like I said before, as we moved home, it kind of shifted how we interact with it. And we didn't have a place other than these dashboards or a group or a gallery on ArcGIS Online to share all of these things. So now we're looking to an ArcGIS hub as an internal way to organize. And one of the benefits of doing that is that people can sign up for these community accounts. So they don't need a separate account. They can access our online organization, even if they're not in the city of Boston. And I can make all of these tools accessible to you no matter where you work or what you do, because in emergency management, our job is to coordinate, not just for the city of Boston, but and for the other towns and cities, but for other departments that might want to work with us and work on that activation. So it's important for us to be able to include people that might not fall under our license agreement, for example. So we're creating a hub so that we can have community accounts and also just kind of spread out that information. There's a lot going on in the dashboards, but it's all useful. So we want a place to be able to input that where people can access it and make it available to them.
Yeah, I know you have 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes remaining.
Cool. I'm wrapping up. Thank you, Shane. So that's what we're working on now, is building out this hub so that we have a one-stop shop. I mentioned before that we're using WebEOC as well, but the issue with that is that you need to have 2 logins, one for WebEOC and then one for whatever ArcGIS items that we're creating, and this is really just going to alleviate that issue. So for emergency management, I think it's a really interesting way to implement the ArcGIS hub, and I haven't really heard of anybody else doing it this way. So if you are, please let me know. I would love to do that. And then, of course, the other thing that you can do is is set up these public pages. So that is something that we're looking into as well. Our office procures several different data sets for the Metro Boston area. Great place to make it available to download and share for people. So this is what we're working on now to kind of, spread out all of that information that we have available for COVID-19 and for other activations that we do. And finally, just to summarize, this is not a perfect way to do it. I'm sure there are so many ways I could automate this, or I could, make it fancier. But I think what's really important is that it works for us. I'm the only GIS person. I work with a lot of non-GIS people. So a lot of the times I kind of have to take a step back and think, how would I interact with this if I didn't know what GIS was? And so that's really the approach that I take when I'm making any of these applications, not just for COVID-19, is how are people going to use this if they're not familiar with an operations dashboard, or if they're not familiar with a survey 1, 2, 3, 4. So thank you. I think we have like a couple minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions now or later. And I hope that you guys kind of took something away from this.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. Could you stop sharing the screen?
Yes.
Just because then people's faces will pop back up if there are any questions. So on the schedule, which we're going to stick to, we have Katie's talk starting at 11:20. So that leaves us 7 or 8 minutes if people have any questions. And if you would be willing to and you're able, it would be great if people are asking questions to have their video on, at least while they're asking the questions. But I've also been looking in the Whova chat and question and answers, and I haven't seen anything specific yet. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask away if you have questions for Daniel.
I have a question, Daniel.
Yeah, Katie, go for it.
You mentioned in the survey that you had different pages.
Mm-hmm.
We've used Survey 1, 2, 3 just a little bit in Cambridge. We're like just starting to get into it, and I wasn't aware that there was this idea of pages in your survey.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that you can add. We just used the online Survey 1, 2, 3 builder for this. We kept it really simple. But that's one of the things that you can drag and drop, like a text box or a date picker or a map location. You can actually drop a page break in there so that it'll go to a separate page.
And do folks have to fill out things on the first page before they can get to the next page? Is that how that works?
Yes, if one of your lines, like a text box, was required, it's not going to let you proceed to the next page without filling out the required boxes. If none of your boxes were required, then you could proceed to the next page.
So I have a question. As somebody who's used Survey 1, 2, 3 quite a bit with random people who don't know anything about GIS, did you get a lot of points that showed you the geographic center of Boston? Because from our Survey 1, 2, 3 instance, when I set the extent to be New Hampshire, I now know where the geographic center of New Hampshire is, because anybody who submitted a point without moving it, it shows up in this one location. Was that a high percentage, or did most people actually put the point where it should be on the map?
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you asked about this, because I meant to point this out. There was actually 2 boxes for a delivery site address, and that's why we did it. If you input just your delivery site address in the map box, it was going to show you whatever the center was or whatever on the map, but it wasn't actually the right location. So that's why we kind of encourage people to drop a point on where they wanted it delivered and then actually put in the address in a separate box so that we could track that. And also with the COVID-19 case mapping, we used a Survey 1, 2, 3 form for that as well. And when I shared it out, people thought it was like a hotspot tracker because the circles were in very specific locations. But I had to be like, oh no, that's just the center of Boston or of Chelsea. So yeah.
Something that I did to try to prevent that from happening is there's a setting where you can request their location, and maybe you don't always want to use the person's location, but at least it forces them to. You have to like start by tapping the map. Right. And then it'll zoom you to your location, and then from there you can move it around.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually.
I mean, our survey was for rodent inspection, so they were actually out doing the inspection, so they had to know like where they were more so than just inputting the address.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. We made the opposite decision because we thought that in general, people in New Hampshire, if it asked you for where are you, that would actually kind of make them a little bit nervous. So the idea that they would put it in themselves was better. But the other thing that we did, of course, from the display standpoint, I was noticing you were thinking about how you display things, is we had them type in their address as well, which seemed like it was maybe doing too much, but then we could use the point to place them on the map without having to worry about any sort of geocoding. And then we could have the address as typed to display in the listing. So we wound up doing it twice. So even the ones that were off, since people typed in their address, when we did the data management, we could just copy and paste their address into the map and find it quickly. But we did have it in two different ways to try to make sure we got an attempt, especially since I think it was maybe about 8% of the people didn't move the point at all. And they just submitted just that one place. What was the biggest point of resistance, do you think, Daniel, for people using or wanting this information available? Was there some sort of hesitancy to have information of certain types available in different ways?
I don't think there was a lot of resistance. I actually think the one cool, let's not say cool thing about the pandemic, but a lot of people were starting to be interested in more of these GIS applications, right? Especially because that Johns Hopkins University dashboard got so much traction. I think people were actually the opposite. They were more encouraged to figure out ways to collect this data and visualize it. And I had a lot more people coming to me and saying, hey, what can you do with this? So I actually think I got the opposite reaction, where people were starting to think about these dashboards in different ways because they saw it in the mainstream media and how it was affecting the pandemic, really.
Checking again to see if I missed any questions that were posted. I don't think we have any. So why don't we go ahead and switch over to Katie, you sharing your screen, and then maybe we'll wait another minute or so and then get started with Katie's presentation.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you. And so since some of you may not have been here for the beginning, I'll just like to reiterate that we're going to have Katie's presentation, which lasts from 11:20 to 11:40. At 11:40, we're going to switch over just to open discussion, both any questions that people have for Katie and then any potential questions that weren't asked for Daniel. Feel free to hold on to those questions and ask them by unmuting yourself during the discussion period or in the Whova app or in the Whova web page. Please put any questions in the question and answer section of the session. So not just the specific talk for Katie, but the session in general. And any questions I see there at the end of her talk, I will go ahead and read out to her. But since we have only about 20 people on here anyway, it'll be easy enough for people to unmute themselves and ask the questions at the end.
And for those of you that just saw Daniel's talk, I wish that we had called this like COVID applications or something, ArcGIS Online applications, because you covered Survey 123, Web App Builder, dashboards, and then touched on Hub. And now I'm going to be talking about the Crowdsource Reporter app. So we've got a lot of different Esri tools in play here, which is pretty cool.
Okay, it's 11:20 on my clock, so I'd say go ahead and get going, Katie.
All right. So hello, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in today. My name is Katie Grillo, and I'm a member of the NEARC board, but I also work full-time at the City of Cambridge as a GIS Web Technology Specialist. And today I'm going to talk about the COVID-19 public comment application that we created as part of the Shared Streets Initiative in Cambridge. So the City of Cambridge is a very densely populated area, just just near Boston. And with such a large population and being such a highly densely populated area, there were a lot of challenges when it came to trying to appropriately social distance outside of our homes. And there's this idea that we should be maintaining a 6-foot distance between one another. But when you think about the width of an average sidewalk in the city, you can't always safely pass individuals by giving 6 feet. So a lot of folks actually need to step into the street in order to get around each other. So this idea of shared streets was born, and now there are tons of communities in the cities, in cities all around the country that are doing this. And I also noticed that you can see these now on Google Maps, which is pretty cool. So if you are trying to see if there's shared streets in your community, try checking out Google Maps, and you might see some of them listed in your area. But so what is a shared street? So a shared street is designated, the way that we've done it in Cambridge is that the street is designated for local access only. And the idea is that you're trying to minimize the amount of vehicular travel and make the street more shareable and more open and available for individuals that might be walking or biking. And in Cambridge, we've noticed that a lot of families will take to the streets. So you'll see parents biking with their kids through some of these shared streets. So it just allows for folks to be able to be outside and maintain that 6-foot distance. Now, when this project was first introduced, there was some confusion. People thought that shared streets meant that there were no cars allowed. So there was a lot of comments that the folks in the traffic and parking division were receiving that people were asking questions. Well, can I still park here? Can I still receive deliveries? What happens with trash pickup? All those things. And the Shared Streets Initiative, all these streets are still open for all of these different activities, but it's just that the emphasis is supposed to be put on the walkability and the bikeability of those particular streets. So as a way to try to deal with some of these comments that the folks in the traffic department were receiving, they came to us in the GIS department and asked us if we could create some sort of public comment application for them. So I'm going to start off by showing you the public view of this application, and then what we'll do is go into more of how this was actually created and some of the tips and tricks that I learned along the way. So when you first open this application, you get this little splash screen that tells you a bit about the Shared Streets Initiative, and it gives you some instructions for how to interact with this map. And now this is just something to note. I will share this story map presentation with all of you, but this is a live application and it is still actively receiving comments. So I ask, if you do explore this, please don't post comments if you're not actually a Cambridge resident trying to comment on these areas. Anyway, so this is a live application, which means we do have a lot of comments in here already. And I'm just opening up the map legend right now so that we can see kind of what's going on this map. So these teal colored dots are all of the comments that folks have submitted. We also needed to add some just sort of contextual layers. So the other dots that you're seeing are bus stop changes that are either implemented or coming soon. And then you can also see all of the line layers that are added to the map. And the line layers are categorized into a couple different things. We have the shared streets themselves, and those are indicated by the color blue. And again, you can see that there's some that are implemented, others that are coming soon, and some that are proposed. So this iteration of the public comment map is designed for folks to be able to comment on the current proposed network. And I'll show you some details from our past comments in just a minute. But so the blue lines are the shared streets, but then we also wanted to add some more details for what we call public connections and private connections. So these are just not necessarily full-blown shared streets, but they're just ways that people can flow from one shared street to another. And then the last thing is this idea of expanding some of the outdoor dining areas And so in this section of Inman Square, what they did is they turned this one side of the street into an expanded dining area. And as a result, this became a one-way flow of traffic. And so this detour was implemented to route traffic around that particular area. So focusing now on the comments, what I can do as a user here is I can click on the map and I can see what that'll do is open up the comment details for that particular point. So the top section here shows me the comment that was submitted, and I can even see the date and time that that was submitted. And this is where I ask, if you are exploring this application, please don't click buttons. What I can do is I can click the I agree, and this will add a like or an agreement to this particular comment. And then you also have the ability to leave a reply. So you can see here, this particular point on the map has 2 sub-comments that other folks have added as well. So that's interacting with the map, but you can also interact with the comments through the list that's over on the side of the screen. And if I click on Oxford Street, you'll see the map zooms me over to that particular point. And again, I can see the original comment that was submitted and some of the sub-comments associated with that as well. And you can see scrolling through that the way we set this up is that it displays based off of the name of the street. And then you can see this little counter is showing all of the folks that like that particular comment that was submitted. And you can see that this one here, it has 11 different people that like it. So that's and it happens to be a positive comment, which is very nice to see. We have gotten a mix of both positive and negative feedback, but it's all part of the process. So the folks in the traffic department have been very grateful to have this tool available to them to kind of see what folks on the public are thinking about these particular shared streets. So I can, if I wanted to, I can go and add a new comment to this map by clicking the Add Comment button. And what this does is it turns my mouse into this pointer where I can click and add a point to the map. We did learn that we needed to set up this restrictive boundaries so that comment points cannot be placed outside of the city of Cambridge. We found that some folks were putting points in Somerville at the beginning, and there's nothing that we in Cambridge can do about shared streets in Somerville. So I'll show you a little bit later how we created this boundary area to prevent folks from commenting outside of our area of interest. So we then, kind of as Daniel was saying in the discussion we were just having with Shane as well, is that need to sometimes duplicate the entries that you're putting in when you're doing any sort of like public comment or form submissions. So users can click to add a point to the map, but then we also ask them to type in the name of the street that they're commenting on. They can then say whether this is or is not, or why they think this is or is not a good location. And we used a drop down so that folks could designate the the neighborhood that folks are commenting from. So the folks in traffic department wanted to know if people are commenting within their own neighborhood, or if they're actually maybe commenting from one neighborhood, they live in one neighborhood and they're commenting in another, and that could be an indicator that folks are trying to travel by foot or by bike from one neighborhood to the other. So after you fill out those items, you then click report it, and your comment gets added to the list here. So this application itself actually has 2 separate maps in it. The first map is the comments on the current, the proposed network, but the first iteration that we did of this project is actually included here in all of the past and present comments. So I was joking with somebody else about how we can't even blame the conference center for their poor internet. It's just all our own fault now. So hopefully this improves. Anyway, so as that's loading, we can see, if I open up the legend again now, you can see that those green dots are any sort of comments that were added as part of the previous shared streets. And then the teal again are the ones for the currently proposed. Right. So that's the front end. That's what the folks in the public are seeing. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the deployment or the method that we use to create this application. So Esri offers a ArcGIS solution that will create all this content for you. So this is their ArcGIS solutions page, and it gives you an overview of the Citizens Problem Reporter, which is the tool that we used for this. And if you use this Deploy Now button, then what that will do is bring you to the ArcGIS solutions page, and it will open up this splash screen that tells you a little bit more about the Citizens Reporter. And if you click Get Now, then what it will do, if I go back to my story map, what it will do it'll get it all for you. It will create all of the data layers, the maps, the forms, the web mapping application. It even creates a dashboard, a hub page, and all of the groups that are necessary for the particular, for this application. Now, that's great, but I did not need, it created 37 items, and I don't even know how many groups are here. You can see all the little letters C that you see there. Each one that's a different color is a different group. So I think it actually created like 7 different, created like 7 different groups for me. So that was a bit of an overkill for what we were trying to do for this project. So what I tried to do, sorry, I don't know why it's jumping. What I tried to do was just use a single layer to create just the content that I needed for our application. So I grabbed just one of the layers from that solution, and you see here, there's 404 error now. If you follow that link, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But when I created this application 3 months ago, I used this particular data layer. And from within ArcGIS Online, I said create a feature layer, and I wanted to create a feature layer from a URL. And what this did was create both a point layer and an associated comment table. Now, you might be thinking, okay, why are you even importing a layer? Why didn't you just manually create the point and create the table layer and do the join? Well, I'd be very interested to hear if anyone has feedback on how exactly to get this to work, because I couldn't get it to, I was struggling to have that relationship built behind the scenes that would allow the crowdsourced reporter app to create content and have that be joined on the fly. So by using this import, like create layer from URL, it just kind of created that relationship for me behind the scenes, and I didn't have to worry about configuring it myself. So the other thing that we did from there was we learned over time that we needed to create a view layer. And the reason for this is the folks in the traffic department wanted to or needed to have the ability to delete some features from the map. The only reason for that is if any comments were submitted that may be inappropriate. People were quite emotional about this initiative at the beginning, so we just wanted to be able to curate or clean some of the data a little, just to remove some of the any inappropriate content. And then we also were trying to clean this up just to make it a little easier for folks to navigate. So in some cases, if there were multiple comments on the same street or on the same intersection, then the folks in traffic department would kind of clean up the data a little just to consolidate that information. So they would delete some points in some cases. Now, the reason for the view layer is because in order to enable the delete access, that would then mean that folks in the public would technically be able to delete points, and we didn't want them to do that. So creating this view layer allowed the folks in the traffic department to be able to edit and manage the data behind the scenes while maintaining the editing restrictions on the actual public application. So once we created our data layer, we then needed to add that to a map. And this map, as I learned moving through this project, the map is more important than I thought. So there is a lot of configuration that you'll do in the application. I'll show you that in a minute, but the map itself is where you house, obviously where you house your data layers, but it's also where you need to put any of those reference layers for the map. And it's also where you configure the pop-ups, which I'll show you in just a minute.
Katie, just so you know, you have 5 minutes left.
Thank you. All right, so after you create your map, then the way to deploy the Citizens Reporter is actually through a group. So I don't know if anybody else knew this. I certainly didn't know this at first, but we all are familiar with creating a map and then using the share button to create a web app. Well, there's a number of different solutions that you can actually create from a group specifically. So you add your map or maps to a group, and from within that group, you choose share, create web app, and then there's these 5 different solutions you can choose from, and one of those is the Crowdsource Reporter app. So after the application is created, you then start to get into your configuration. And so on the, so on the general tab, this is where you can select your group if you need to change that at any point in time. This is also where you add the information for that splash page that we saw when we first opened the application. The theme is pretty straightforward. It's where you just designate colors. You will need to have a URL for your logo and also for your favicon if you want to replace the Esri favicon. Under the Options tab, this is where you use those reference layers. So that's where we were referencing those line layers or those bus stations that I was showing you in the application. And it's also where you can choose whether or not to show pop-ups for that content as well. The Access tab is where, most importantly, the sign-in options. If you uncheck all of the boxes here, then that will remove that sign-in page that's there by default. We didn't want to have our users sign in order to use this application, so we just turned that off. Search is pretty straightforward, and then the Form tab, this is where you actually configure your form. Now, what this is really doing is it's just configuring the different sections of the form. So you put the section header, and you designate whether you want that section to be the top, middle, or bottom of the form. This is also where you can add that uneditable polygon layer. So in our case, we use the Cambridge city boundary to restrict or specify the area in which folks can add comments. And then finally, this is where you actually format the comment button itself. So you can change the text for what that comment button looks like. So in our application, we said that we want folks to leave a comment. So it says add a comment. And then we also set that to be that blue color. So you can put that there. Now, that customization that we were just looking at, if I go back to the form here, we can see that it's just designating the headers and where that header is structured in the application itself. So in order to customize any of the content below that header, you have to actually go back to your map and come on. All right, so sorry. So when I add a comment, it's talking about the identify a location or shared street suggestion. Those are the only 2 things that I could edit from within the application itself. So in order to add those other sections of the form, I actually needed to go back to my map and configure the attributes for the pop-up attributes. So from the comment layer, I chose configure pop-up. And then under the configure attributes section, this is where you use the checkboxes to toggle on and off which layers you want to have displayed. And that field alias is actually the question that you're asking. So the field alias is what will designate, and so in this screenshot here, or this video, I'm going to show again that form, and you can see the name of street is actually the alias for my location field. And the why, all that text for the why this is or is not a good location, all of that text is actually just the alias for my details field name. So it took me a while to figure out, which is why I just wanted to highlight it here for all of you.
Technically, you have 1 minute, but we're going right into
doing it. No,
so.
I've only got 1 minute. This is great.
Oh, you're all good.
Thanks, Shane. So just a couple known issues, things that I discovered along the way. first of all, as I mentioned before, apparently the data that I used to create this application no longer exists or is inaccessible. That's awkward. I'll figure out what's going on with that, and I will update this presentation with a new data layer that we can use to just create that single point layer and comment layer. The other thing that I want to point out is that there is a bug in the Crowdsource Reporter app for the ArcGIS World Geocoding Service. And if I go back to my application, I can show you what this looks like. So if I want to type in 795 Mass Ave, which is City Hall. So if I start typing a number value, then you'll see here the results that I'm getting in this search box are not very helpful. It's showing me something in like Russia maybe, and then I've got a couple zip codes and some other random numbers. So you're like, okay, let's just keep typing. So if I start to type 795 Massachusetts Avenue, now it's giving me just a zip code and Massachusetts. So in short, what's happening here is the geocoder just doesn't work in Crowdsource Reporter app. And I tried using Esri's geocoder. I tried building a custom geocoder for Cambridge. There's a setting within the application where you can choose to only search within the extent of your mapping application. I set that and none of it works. So it's quite frustrating. The folks at Esri, as a solution, they told me to use a different application, which is not a solution. So in my opinion, there is none offered at this time. So just something to be aware of. And it is, I mean, folks can use the click to add a point to the map, and they can, if you type an entire address in here and paste it, then it will still zoom you into that location on the map, but the search itself just doesn't work. All right, so next steps for shared streets. This is actually the second iteration of this project where, as I mentioned, we had that first round of commenting, and then the folks in traffic department implemented some changes, and now they're on a second round of commenting. So the idea is that they're going to continue expanding this program throughout the city and continue using this public comment as a way to determine more locations. Something else that's nice that's come out of this is other departments have recognized the crowdsourced reporting and they really like it as well. So we're using it for, someone used it for a public meeting so they could collect public comments live within a public meeting. And all of that was map-based, obviously. And then we are also using it for the bike infrastructure in Cambridge so that folks can comment on areas of the city that might need more bike lanes and things like that. So more crowdsourced reporting coming from Cambridge soon. I do have some links in here to the Shared Streets Initiative so you can get more information about that and the City of Cambridge COVID-19 information page. And this presentation was a story map, so I'll share a link to that after as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've dutifully been looking at the question and answer in the Whova session, and not shockingly, there has been nobody that put any questions or comments in there. So again, if you would be willing to put on your video, or if you can, that would be great. But so you can see people who are out there. But does anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments, either from what Katie just talked about, or even back to what Daniel talked about in the previous presentation? I'm ready for Jeff to ask the tough questions now.
Good presentations from the Cambridge, Daniel's also, but Katie, the proposed bicycle network vision, that on their website? I know that was a soft launch, but that's the one that people could put comments in about bicycle facilities, lanes, things.
Yeah, that one did just get posted last week or the week before. So I'll have to dig up a link for that, but it allows folks to add comments about, like Jeff was saying, proposed bike infrastructure, things like that.
Yeah, the person at traffic department who's an outreach person and technical, very excited about this, wants to use it for other stuff. So, we're hoping that the it grows and on the Esri side as we start using it, putting some time and effort into it.
Yeah, we use some folks in departments in Cambridge. We've noticed use wiki maps as a way to do public engagement. And this individual in the traffic department, now that she has this RTS Online crowdsourced reporter, has kind of made it her own personal mission to destroy all wiki maps in Cambridge, which I'm like, have at it. That's amazing. Yes, please. We'll try to have a standardized solution to do public commenting in Cambridge. That would be amazing. Andy, did you have a question?
Yes, your issue with the geocoder, is that just because they don't allow a general hook into other geocoders, and if so, have you tried the OpenStreetMap geocoder?
It was something to do with the search itself. So the geocoder is technically working, but you have to type in the entire address in order for it to zoom you to that particular location. I didn't try an open source geocoder. So maybe I will try doing that, but I did try the Esri one and then tried creating a Cambridge one, and that didn't work either.
Okay, so they don't provide the breakdown by street and city separate, zip code separate. They only provide one field as a way to access the geocoder. Is that it?
I think so, yes. And then the thing too is that there's a checkbox within the application that says only search within the map extent. And so the idea of that is if you just zoom into Cambridge, then that search should only give you results within Cambridge, and that's just not working at all.
Right.
So that's the bug itself.
Thanks.
Sure.
Whenever you choose an app to use, like for example, in my work recently, I chose the classic story maps just because they worked better for what I wanted. It's interesting to think about, especially since this person seems to be on a mission now to convert people to this crowdsourced reporter. Is there a future for that app? Like, is it one of the like remnants from a leftover time period that happens to work well for this one thing? Or would you have a feeling for what that looks like for this approach in the next like year, 2 years, 3 years? It's hard to know, but I'm just interested to hear what you have to say.
It is hard to know, and I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges with any sort of web GIS and web mapping is that it's just an ever-evolving field. The crowdsourced reporter, I suppose a nice thing with that is, generally speaking, it's for a particular moment in time. So I suppose the idea would be that you would create a reporting application once and use it for one sort of crowdsource, and then moving forward, you're kind of just creating them as needed. So the idea of having them be kind of like a history or archive of different public comments might not be as important. And then at least on our end, we do have the data. So I could just create a map that shows that data and maybe use a web app builder or something, or a dashboard even, to show all the comments and results from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're collecting more specific information, but I know, and I think my colleague is on here from Extension of Casey. I can see her turning it on. I mean, we've long bemoaned the loss of the crowdsource story map, which in a lot of ways is pretty simplistic, but that idea of being able to click and collect and show something fairly quickly, I'm always sort of looking around for different ideas and approaches. And I have to say, I've never tried this approach with the reporter app. So that's why I was more interested to hear what you thought about it going forward. But as you said, the key thing is the data. Just always looking for, a lot of people are say pair survey 1, 2, 3 with something else, or so it's interesting to see the various approaches, both that are evolving and things that were still around, or maybe are kind of still around, but who knows what's happening next. But in any case, sorry, Casey, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question, and thanks, Katie. I really enjoyed seeing the crowdsourced reporter in action. That's something that I've been thinking about deploying, but just haven't had a chance. I'm curious about what your next steps are when you are collecting the data from the crowdsourced reporter. Do you then analyze those data? Like, how do you report back to the community that they have been heard and these are the next steps that you're going to take to implement what you learned?
Yeah, so One of the things that the folks in the traffic department wanted to anonymize the survey. And that was something I touched on very briefly, where you have the option to uncheck all three of those boxes to allow for just basically there's no splash screen for sign in or anything like that. They also considered whether or not they wanted folks to add like an email address or something like that. And in the end, they decided to just make the forms anonymous. The reason for that was because we were collecting so many comments, and the folks in the traffic department were concerned about their capacity to be able to respond at the individual level. So instead, what they did was create a public meeting. And so the public meeting itself was designed as a way for folks to speak up about a particular comment that might be on the map. And it was also, as I mentioned, we did that live public commenting. So within this meeting, folks could have the map open and be adding points to it during that meeting. And the individual from the traffic department, we actually also created a line layer so that she could edit that line layer on the fly in that public meeting and be like adding new proposed lines during the public meeting. So that was a great way for members of the community to feel like they've been heard and to feel like they've had the opportunity to have and see their comments kind of being implemented in real time. And then just doing like future iterations. So in our example, we had that first round of comments, and then we created another copy of the application and used that for the second round of commenting. Sorry, and I think you also asked about the data behind the scenes. So yeah, so the data itself is managed by a member of the traffic department just on ArcGIS Online. So we created another map. There is a lot of content involved with the crowdsource reporter, I do have to admit. Even outside of the Esri solution, you end up with a lot of layers and maps and things. But we created another map that just allowed for that user to be able to see the attribute table and click and point around and look at all the data and be able to use that to draw like proposed lines and things like that.
Okay, we still have about officially 7 minutes or so left in the session for discussion. Anybody else who has not yet asked a question, want to ask a question? I'm
curious, Daniel, the forms that you're using and even the web app builder that you showed us, are those public or are they just set up for internal use?
The actual form that is public, anyone pretty much can go and submit one of those. It is closed now, but before it was, but the other applications are for internal use only.
So I asked a question in the written comments. I just wanted to clarify that the bug with the geocoder, that's just in the crowdsource reporter. I mean, yeah. Has anyone encountered that other places?
I have actually seen it in a couple other applications, but it's not as the crowdsource reporter one just doesn't work properly. So I'm trying to work with the folks at Esri to at least put like a more description for like a workaround or something else that we can do. You can also, maybe I'll try posting it to GeoNet so that folks can help me escalate that issue. Because I do think it's really important to have that geocoder working properly.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I don't know how many people have tried to use GeoNet. I know that we're suggested very often that we should be very compelled by GeoNet. But I, at least over the past 6 months, I found GeoNet to be helpful. People from Esri have reacted, reached out, people have chimed in. And I've also found Twitter for certain people in the Esri world that they respond. I've even been teaching story map workshops, had a question, took a 2-minute break to send a tweet. And then by the end of the workshop, the story map team had responded with an update or a solution. So I think the combination of GeoNet plus Twitter, I found to people between the two of those, I've gotten a lot of good response, even though sometimes the answer is, yeah, we know, and we're working on it. But I reported a bug in survey 123 that if you had too many nested questions, and then had a certain type of question underneath, it wouldn't display correctly. And they said, wow, congratulations, this is new to us. You've had so many of these questions set up and nobody's ever quite brought this to our attention. But they even 3 months later followed back up with me and said, hey, you know what? The solution is there. When it's moved over to this version, please retry it. We think that this is fixed. So at least most of the time I've tried it, which is not a million times, but most of the time I've tried one of those two or both those approaches, I've wound up getting some good response. I don't know, have you tried GeoNet in the past to get support for various things, Katie, or would this be your Hail Mary to try a different approach?
I admit that I'm not maybe as active as I should be or could be on GeoNet. I do go there from time to find solutions, and I have noticed, as you said, that it seems like the folks at Esri are very responsive and very helpful on there. But I haven't done too much posting myself, so maybe I need to be better about that.
Yeah, I've only used it ever to ask questions to get help, and probably only 6 or 7 times, but it's been useful for that, at least for me. Anyone else out there with questions for either Katie or Daniel?
I guess that's also along the lines of GeoNet and Esri support and things like that. It's a good time to plug or remind folks that there is the Esri Q&A session will be tomorrow, and under the community section in Whova, there is the opportunity for you to post questions to Esri. So maybe we can ask them about this bug and see what they think about it.
Maybe we'll end 3 minutes early so that you get a chance to go and post it yourself and see.
And everyone can thumbs up it, yeah.
Okay, well, I have here at 11:58, so if there's no other questions, I just wanted to thank both Katie and Daniel for their presentations and all of you for attending and your questions. And so the afternoon will start back up after lunch at 1:30. And again, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.